Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and if you've been following me on Twitter at Redbeard Brian, you've seen me gone from like 100 something followers to currently 1,200, and continually thinking about how do you build community on Twitter? How do you build community anywhere really? And how do you combine the different parts of who you are? You have maybe your business side, you have your life story side, maybe if you're edgy, you have your politics side, or maybe some death metal stuff like my friend Paul Sokol. How do you combine all that into the self that you bring into social media? And we're talking today about specifically Twitter, to go and help build an audience that is interacting with you in your authentic self, in which you can also be selling your products to the right people for them. To dive into this question, we have the creator of Define Your Following course on Twitter growth, Arvid Kahl. Arvid, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Well, hello. Thanks so much for having me today.
It's fantastic to see you. I see your tweets all the time, and we'll just spell that name out. Arvid Kahl is Arvidkahl.
That's
If you
right.
guys also want to be seeing these wonderful tweets talking about building in public and about how you collaborate and go get people involved in stuff, and you had your books before, Zero to Sold and The Embedded Entrepreneur, and now you have this Find Your Following thing. I'm so interested in the Find Your Following because I have this niche of expertise where I'm known as a Keep certified partner, which is the formerly known as Infusionsoft company. And I've wrote the book on Plus This, which you can get at plusthisbook.com. So within these particular apps, I can say, oh yeah, I'm an expert at this one app. But then how do you branch beyond some narrow technical expertise into saying, here's who I am, and what's the right balance of sharing this? Here's the specific stuff I offer as a business, and then here's me, the whole person. Arvid, how do we combine that to grow on Twitter?
Oh wow, that's a grand problem you have there. But hey, you know what?
It is.
We can use Twitter in many different ways, right? You have people who use Twitter, like you said earlier, to talk about their hobbies, like music and that kind of stuff, unless they're professionals. But most people use Twitter in a more all-encompassing way, where they talk about whatever comes to mind, which is it's a fair way to use the platform. But it quickly gets kind of chaotic in a sense that if somebody were to follow you, they only really get to see, well, what do they get to see? Kind of everything, but nothing that is coherent or something that they could rely upon if they were to follow you. And that is one of the most important things if you want to use Twitter professionally for brand building, be that for your business or just for yourself as an expert in a field. There has to be a certain kind of consistency in the type of content that you put on Twitter. That doesn't mean you have to do 100% only things that just one kind of topic. That gets boring over time. But I found that there's like an 80-20 kind of distribution between things you should be talking about as an expert and the other things, 20%, things that you should talk about just to kind of give yourself some depth, some kind of additional information where people can see who you are as a person. But that's kind of where it starts. It starts with figuring out what is the main topic that I want to talk about. And then through time, you find people who follow you for this reason, right? If you talk about your expertise in this particular software on Twitter and you talk with people, you engage with people that are already out there, already having conversations about this topic or similar adjacent topics, then over time, they will find you as an expert, as a resource for that particular topic. And then you branch out into adjacent topics, and then they might be interested in that or maybe not, but you're still the expert in the original topic that you were talking about. But they invite their peers who might be interested in your additional content. And that's kind of how you branch out. You do it slowly and by increasing the radius of the topics that you're talking about. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah. So, Arvid, you have over 60,000 followers. What was the core topic you started off with before branching out?
So in 2019, I sold the business that I co-founded with my partner. We had a software as a service business called FeedbackPanda. And you already mentioned I wrote a book about this. Zero to Sold is the story of that business and everything I learned in it. And I had just finished selling the business in November, and I had 400 followers on Twitter. I had 400 followers from what must have been 10 years of, just being on Twitter. Like lurking around, liking this, talking about that, talking about a lunch here and some World of Warcraft there, and maybe some music here, all kinds of topics that I found interesting as a person, but there wasn't any core topic at this point. And when we sold the business, I decided I'm going to start a blog. And I just wanted to share everything that I learned about building a software as a service business, because that's what I had spent the last 2 years at this point doing every single day. And I felt I have stood on the shoulders of giants for long enough. It's time that I let people stand on my much smaller shoulders. That was the idea at this point. And I decided that I will now focus exclusively on talking to entrepreneurs about things that matter to entrepreneurs, software and entrepreneurs, indie hackers, people who build solopreneur businesses, essentially, like
Mhm.
like we did, Danielle and I, my partner. So I focused just really on talking about these things professionally, talking about what I knew, what I learned, and sharing my articles that I wrote on my blog and my newsletter, that kind of stuff. And every now and then I would just splice in a bit of colorful material about what I thought about. Nothing too controversial. And you mentioned politics earlier. Yeah, you said it's edgy, but it's kind of edgy to the point where it actually distracts people from your main value proposition if you use Twitter professionally. Because if Twitter is one thing outside of most really niche communities, it is vitriolic. It is
Yeah,
toxic. And that is a big problem that Twitter has with people who use it recreationally. Like the moment you follow your friends and family, you're gonna have that one idiot in the group of friends or a group of acquaintances, I guess, that has nothing better to do than post politically divisive stuff all the time. And
that's a block.
exactly. And it should be,
Sorry,
because
bro.
if you use Twitter professionally, you have to take care of these things. You have to
Yeah,
like actively and efficiently cull the voices that pull in negativity into your feed. Because just like on any
yeah,
other social media, you are who you're surrounded by, right? And if you follow the wrong
yeah,
people, that's the stuff you're engaged with. And you don't want that
yeah.
if you want people to follow you.
I don't talk about politics in a general sense. I talk about politics only as it affects the idea of onshoring America first, where you have your VAs, what countries you should work with, and how that impacts building a business.
Yeah.
So I try to go, I don't say like, we'll go this politician, go that politician, because that's boring and it's everywhere. It's more about how my like supply chain issues in the US and how that has to do with the percentage of parts that are made in China in our computers, anything like that.
Yeah.
I might have some mention there because it relates to my mission of, well, how do you build a generationally sound business where you're taking care of your great great grandchildren
Right.
through your efforts today? So I don't not talk about politics, but I also don't focus on that at all.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I used to study this. I used to study political science, which is one of the
Yeah.
weirder things in my life, because I'm a software engineer by trade, really. But at some point, I decided, hey, let's do something completely different. And then I studied philosophy and political science, which was fun. And
Oh,
it gave me a lot of
fantastic.
insight, because what you just described, that's not really politics, it's policy. Or if at all, polity,
Mm,
like the institutions through which we have to live our lives. So there's these three things. And
fair.
politics is the day-to-day stuff, and that's what most people on Twitter are actually complaining about. What the
Hmm.
the people on C-SPAN have to say about whatever issue. It doesn't really matter. Like, what matters is the law that is put into place that then prevents you or the people who want to accomplish the thing that you want them to accomplish, what they have to struggle with. So by talking about policy and polity, the institutions and the laws that we have in our lives, you give a lot of knowledge, you give a lot of insight into something where people can actually formulate a plan of action to get to where they want to be. Now, if you talk about politics and the he said she said kind of stuff, that is it's to most people these things seem to be the same, but are really not. You can really make a
Hmm.
distinction here and talk about the stuff that gives meaningful insight into people's like actionable planning, or you can talk about stuff that really doesn't matter and that just creates more toxic environments on Twitter. And you're doing the right thing, obviously, by not talking about the day-to-day stuff, but pulling people into the grander conversations, the bird's eye view, and the actual, meaningful law-based and legislation-based conversations that are happening. And those are usually not as vitriolic as the stuff that we see on Twitter.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the phrase great men or small minds discuss people, mediocre minds discuss events, and great minds discuss ideas. And I attempt to stay on the great mind side of that,
It
where
definitely, it's a good
any,
it's a good kind of framework for
yeah,
most things
I
on
haven't talked
Twitter.
about the Ukraine war at all in detail, but I think about the part of that that's the most interesting to me now. Now, do you know John Robb? Are you familiar with him?
I don't think so, no.
Johnrobb, the greatest warfare strategist in the world. I'm a little bit biased.
Mm,
I've got to interview him 4 times in my podcast. I do podcasts with him inside his internal group. Amazing guy. You got to follow him. I love his perspective on everything Ukraine war is the most interesting. And by the way, folks, we're recording this on April 18th, 2022, because I'm aware that anything you say about current events can sound insane a month later or
Yeah.
a day later. But the one thing that's really interesting to all that's worth talking about is Upwork canceling Russian contracts,
Hmm.
where until very recently we had access to people, to talent in the entire world except for maybe North Korea.
Yeah.
And then suddenly our institutions decided, our networks decided, no, we're going to take millions of talented people and remove the ability of entrepreneurs like me to work with them, and also remove their ability to take better care of their future generations by working and gaining skills and hiring from elsewhere in the world. And I can say, okay, well, here's this one slice of this huge conflict, million facets. But this one idea of we're going to stop doing business with each other, like, that's a disaster.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's something I'd be happy to talk about on Twitter, because that affects all of us. And the idea that we're not going to let our, like, we're going to identify with our political leaders so much you can't even hire someone to do some copywriting for you.
Yeah.
I'd rather
Yeah.
live in the world where I don't necessarily know which country the person I'm hiring is in. I had a client where I got this video built for them, and I'm trying to think, what country was that guy in Upwork in? I don't remember. I don't. It doesn't matter to me because he did really great work, and you know what? I'm going to hire him again.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he's not in Russia, because then I'm not. Whoops. But other than that, I can go for special stuff, hire the best in the world wherever I find them. But also, I do try to go hire America first when I can. Most of my staffers are in the US, and I try to facilitate that. And I also like having conversations around it, around
Yes.
what does it happen when Canadians hire Canadian first when they can, and they focus on making Canada the best place it can be. Same with America, same with Mexico, same with everywhere across the world. That's the kind of conversation that I enjoy having.
Yes, and that's a conversation that is not about necessarily like who's right and who's wrong, but you're talking about like what impact that does this piece of policy have on my life and the
Yeah,
life of the people that I care about. It's kind of you're looking at it from your limited and intentionally limited expert perspective. You're not imagining yourself to be an expert on warfare or on like
yeah.
geopolitics, which I also wouldn't claim to be, even though I studied it. Right, that stuff is
Hmm.
stuff that I have opinions on at this point, because even though I
Yeah,
studied it a decade ago or so, like obviously a lot of stuff changed, and a lot of stuff that if you don't
yeah,
like have your finger on the pulse, then you won't know. So when I talk about this, I talk about, okay, what does that mean for solopreneurs who want to work remotely, like digital nomads? Like, what is the visa
yeah,
situation now? Or like
yeah,
all these Russian contractors, same problem for me as well. Like, I see a lot of founders who build and operate a global business. It's just a software as a service business from Russia. And now all of a sudden, they can't use Stripe anymore because credit cards don't work because the networks have shut down the cards. So they can't charge people money for their business that has very little to do with Russia, other than that's where the account was created. Most people let their stuff run on AWS anyway, right? So nothing about that business was in Russia other than the address of the founder. And now they can't get money for the service that has really nothing to do with any kind of geopolitical situation. It is very frustrating, and it kind of triggers us to have opinions about stuff that might be quite divisive and definitely won't help you build a reputation as a caring, kind, and friendly expert if you go too far. That's kind of why I'm saying
yeah.
this, right? That's why I'm telling people try to stay out of the cesspool kind of
Mm.
conversations, because other than you feeling like you're right in front of people who know that you're not, it won't really give you anything, right? And
Yeah,
that,
and
it,
I'm
yeah,
on a mission here, which is, the mission is small entrepreneurs, I think, solve every problem better than either big companies or governments.
yeah, I like
And
that.
so the more money I can get in the hands of small entrepreneurs, that's probably the best way I can solve every problem in the world. That's my thesis. Could be
Yeah,
wrong.
no,
And
it's a good concept. I think subsidiarity, like the concept of solving the problems at the lowest possible level where it impacts
yeah,
most of the local people.
powerful idea. I think also this whole current shenanigans with, as you're saying, Stripe and everything else, it's probably pushing us faster towards a crypto-based payment world. One of the big things that's changing right here with this conflict we're seeing is that we're having this faster drive towards crypto solutions, and normalizing paying people on your team in crypto. From where you sit, Arvid, are we pretty close to that becoming a normal thing, or do you feel like we're pretty far away?
Hmm. Yeah, I've been following this industry quite a bit because there's a huge intersection between the founders of software businesses and people who are interested in new emergent technologies, and obviously
Yeah.
crypto is one of them. There still is a kind of utility problem in many places, like, and I don't want to dive too deep into like, is cryptocurrency a currency or not, because there are
That's a
you
different
know
podcast.
yeah, that's like a series of different interviews you could have, and everybody has their own opinion. I think it definitely makes it easier to circumvent the systemic blockades that exist within the international payment system. Like, to just give a very very generic statement, right? If you wanted to
Hmm.
pay somebody in a country that is now being blocked from the global financial market, you could technically use cryptocurrency at this point. So, yes, that makes certain things possible, even, right? Where they wouldn't be possible otherwise. However, legislation is currently not very crypto friendly, so you might also criminalize yourself in the same moment. Like,
Ooh.
there's a whole lot of systemic stuff that we need to figure out before this actually becomes feasible.
Yeah.
But I've seen people gladly take Bitcoin or Ethereum as payments for on-off kind of freelancing work. And
Yeah.
I think the Stripe's move towards accepting Bitcoin at some point, or accepting cryptocurrencies and or implementing it in their system, is a pretty clear sign that the markets want this and the
Hmm.
suppliers also want to provide it. So yeah, I think it'll happen for those markets where this is the better choice than the globally existing financial system.
It's such a fascinating topic. My company, Lenders Online Training, we teach bankers how to make better loans, and we're United States based. We only serve the
Mhm.
United States. And so we have a lot of insight into the lenders market where banks are just starting to look at, well, when is cryptocurrency collateral? When is it not collateral? Just
Mhm.
starting to ask some of these questions. And then at the same time, we have people who are deep into the DeFi world, and that's just their entire world. And it's one of these, when you see when you live in a world, it's really hard to notice what it looks like outside of your bubble.
Yeah.
Bad news is we're all in that bubble, right?
Yes, that's right.
We just don't know it because if we seem similar enough to our neighbor, then we think I'm not in a bubble. I'm normal.
Yeah.
Those crazy crypto people over there, they're in a bubble. Or
Yeah.
insert your disfavored political opponent over there. Those people are in a bubble. I'm normal. How do you recommend, especially for founders, how do you recommend we come to grips with the bubble that we're in, but also learn to sort of see beyond the edges of that bubble?
Yeah, probably one of the hardest things to do right, honestly, because I don't know if I have an answer to this. Because my suggestion generally when it comes to social media is to exclude the crazy voices, focus
Hmm.
on using the medium that you're in professionally, and then getting out of your house to interact with real human beings every now and then.
Huh.
There's a big problem. Many founders really don't take the time. I certainly remember when I had my software as a service business, like, we didn't really go out much, didn't hang out much with friends because we always had something else to do. But that kind of very heavily limits the amount of and diversity of information that comes into that particular bubble that you're in. So I
Yeah.
think, like, just making the effort to surround yourself with other people, going to meetups, going to just cultural events. I mean, this is kind of a post-pandemic sort of advice, because at this point it's like, wear a mask and hide in your basement situation still in many many places. But in a world where this is possible, that's the way you get out of the bubble, by not just interacting with the people that kind of push their stuff into your streams, but by interacting with people who might not. You know, you have this every year at Thanksgiving, where the whole family comes together, and then these weird little passive aggressive things like just erupt the conversations on the dinner table where worlds collide, right? Maybe
Yeah.
if you had met with people outside of your little bubble, like physically met with other people, these worlds wouldn't be that far apart. But as I am somebody who suggests focusing on a particular niche of very homogenous people, tribes
Hmm.
even, in social media, my answer to this, it's definitely not on Twitter that you're going to get out of your bubble unless you follow many, many people from many different backgrounds. I've started doing this. I follow 12,000 people on Twitter. I have a lot of diversity on my Twitter feed, but I
Hmm.
try to, whenever somebody says something that I disagree with professionally, right? When they talk about audience building or building a software business or anything, and they say something that I think, no, that's not right, I try to understand where it's coming from. And if there is some kind of way where I could argue myself into their position and it wouldn't go against everything I believe in, I follow this person because they just allowed me to grow outside of my comfort zone a
Mhm.
little bit. So,
It's like ordering the
yeah,
pizza, the dish on the menu that you're unsure about, but you might
yes,
like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
just even though you're not sure about it, like,
that's
I
right.
don't know.
Well, you can
Okay, one
always
more big
not get
go
it
for it.
again, right? You can always
Yeah,
get another thing next time. You could
yeah.
unfollow this person on Twitter if they start spewing hatred for no reason. Like nothing in both with pizza that you eat once and then maybe never again, nothing is permanent about this. All of this is consuming, right? It's consumption. You consume people's treats, you consume a pizza, you have consumer choice, and you should deliberately use it.
Yeah. One more big question for you here, Arvid. In your Find Your Following course, which folks you can get at findyourfollowing.com, you talk about building a personal brand. And you've all these various brands going on. You have your Bootstrapped Founder podcast, you have Arvid Kahl on Twitter, you have your books.
Mhm.
How do you differentiate between Arvid Kahl, the human being, and Arvid Kahl, the personal brand? And how similar are those people?
So I wrote and thought about this a couple months ago because there's a lot on Twitter that feels very performative. Like whenever
Mm,
you write something to an audience of like tens of thousands of people, you have to think about what you say, right? There's a risk of being misunderstood. There's a risk of
yeah.
like get annoying people, making people feel bad. So you kind of have to make sure that you don't necessarily limit yourself, but you are aware of how things might sound and look. And that over time turns into you become a persona because you become
Yep.
somebody who is channeling something with some kind of censorship behind the scenes. But I found that I am past this point where I just am the person that I want to be on Twitter, and I stopped really caring about being misunderstood. So at this point, there was a divergence in the past between me as a person and me as a brand, and then they recombined into who I am today. So and I see this with a lot of people. A lot of people start on Twitter, they talk about whatever, and they notice, ooh, this kind of is dangerous. And then they streamline into a persona kind of type, right? Where they're not themselves, but kind of like themselves. And then over time they figure out, okay, well, let's just ignore those people that I'm trying to appease here. And they get back to becoming a real person. That's kind of the progression that I went through. So I think I am the brand at this point because I'm just talking about what I want to talk about. A couple weeks ago, I talked exclusively about World of Warcraft for a week because I thought, hey, there was because World of Warcraft every couple months they release a new expansion and then they have this race to world first, and then all these guilds, all these players, these gamers, they just duke it out and you can watch it on Twitch. And I was like, hey, there's a lot of interesting lessons about entrepreneurship in here. I'm gonna look at this. I'm gonna
Oh, I
watch
love
this
it.
for 8 hours a day, and I'm gonna talk about how people organize.
So you're
And that was just
saying
yeah.
So you're saying
That's
I
what it
should
was.
get my sailboat fixed up, and then I should just be streaming on Twitch from my sailboat, saying, "Here's why this thing broke. Hey, look, there's a shark." Just go
Well,
sailing
if
all day long.
here's the thing, like that would be the 20% content that I talked about earlier. Unless
Fair.
unless you can kind of just lecture people about business, like right from the boat, right? You could
Mhm.
I don't know, like there probably is an angle where you can take yourself sailing and just spending an hour or half an hour talking into your phone for something like doing live podcasts from the sea. People resonate with anything that is kind of novel
Yeah.
or a novel and regular, which is it sounds like they're opposites, but for content, it really is about balancing the two. Um, you can combine this. It would definitely be one point where you and only you, uniquely you, are at the intersection of business advice, sailing, and live broadcasting. Not too many
I've
people do that, right?
I've thought about mountain climbing, where, as far as I know, I'm the only Keep certified partner in the world who's also a mountaineer with 2 summits of Mount Rainier under his belt.
Wow,
Where
that
to me it
is
feels normal because that's what I've
yeah,
done, right? And it was a
yeah,
while ago. I last summited 5 years ago. But if I look at me, if I do my best to look at me from any other direction, it's holy smokes, this guy actually literally climbs mountains that people die on.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so when I write on Twitter about, or I tell stories in the podcast about, yeah, here's how this thing about systems on a mountain is directly related to systems in your business, albeit with less death and doom in your business, hopefully, that, okay, that's actually, it's to me, it's normal. But to other folks, it's exciting. And if it gets some idea across in some way where they can go, oh, that makes sense. And then they take action, then maybe I should be sharing it. I'll tell you though, I used to do a lot more documenting of my travels. I had a buddy who their kid was got in a horrible car accident and was stuck in the hospital for a long time. And I thought, what can I do to help this kid out? And so I went and for the first time and also the last time, for about 3-ish months, I documented my travels like crazy.
Mhm.
So for the certain time period, I have all these videos of me on Mount Rainier, out in other forests, hiking around and narrating what I was doing, saying, here's where I'm at, here's what the conditions are, here's where I'm going next, look over there. And I created all this content. This was before I was really active on Twitter.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, I'm so thankful that I can go back to all these images and these videos and see what the world was like then. And then on the other hand, if I'm out in the mountains, man, I don't want to have my phone out. I
Yeah.
just want to be there. How do you, Arvid, balance that urge and need to document life with being present and just enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah, yeah. That is a problem that I have faced and overcome by just learning how to say no to myself. Like,
Mm.
everything that I could do is a potential piece of content, right?
Yeah.
We recently moved to Canada last year. We lived in Germany, in Berlin. I'm German,
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I'm from. And we moved to Canada in August, somewhere in Ontario. We got a house, we got a garden, we got a backyard, and all that kind of stuff. And everything I did for the very first time kind of taught me something new, and I wanted to share it immediately with my growing audience of people. But I
Yeah.
stopped myself because it's like taking pictures or just recording a concert that you're at. If the only thing that you're looking at is the back of your phone recording what's happening on stage,
Yeah.
why are you at the concert? Why are you not
Yeah.
looking at the stage? And that is something that I personally I don't do that. Like, I go to concerts, I'm right there in the moment, and then afterwards I think about what I learned and I talk about it. But I don't need to share that particular experience to be able to talk about it. So learning
Mm.
to defer the content, to defer the valuable learnings into something that I just take a note at that point, or I don't know, I have my phone with me, but I just quickly dictate it, or into my Apple Watch or whatever, to take a note
Mhm.
of what I want to do, what I want to say, and then keep enjoying the actual thing that I am out there for. So you will not really see me do any kind of content outdoors while I'm doing it. You might hear me talk about it. That's how I personally do it. And I know that that kind of makes it less interesting because people don't get to see what I'm doing. They only get to hear me. But I don't want to sacrifice my life and my experiences for the immediacy of, the medium, which is why I'm not on Instagram. For example, Twitter is you can have photos and videos up there, but it's not the main form of the medium. The main form, the format of the medium is text. So Twitter is something where you can write something at any point and post it. That's great. If I were on Instagram or TikTok, I would have to be much more present in the moment while I create it, and I could
Mhm.
be less present with myself. I would be more present with the phone, and I don't want to do that. So those mediums, they're not for me. I mean, I'm starting YouTube at this moment because I want to be able to do more content, but that also is premeditated, right? It's often pre-written, pre-scripted,
Mhm.
and then recorded. And I'm doing this in my basement. I'm not doing it outside. So it depends on who you are and how you can handle it. I know that I am losing quality of life if I were to do it at the same time. So I'm
Yeah.
not.
Wow. Beautifully said, Arvid. For folks who want to follow you on Twitter, it's Arvid Kahl, ARVIDKAHL. Find your following is that Twitter course that we talked about. Arvid, man, we could go on for hours.
Right.
I love how you look at stuff, and I'm thinking, okay, so did Arvid just tell me to document my repairing my old sailboat, or did he tell me to just enjoy it in the moment? I don't know which yet, but folks, I'll let
Both.
you know when I figure it out.
Both. Try both and see what works for you. Hey, everybody's different. You might find your calling in doing live streams from your sailing boat. You never know
Well,
until you
but
try.
once the boat's on the water, right now the boat is in the repair and dry dock stage.
Right.
That is a
Yes.
different experience than the look at these dolphins. This is
Yeah.
the look at that mold, which is
That's
just
true.
not, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the mold, maybe not. Yeah, hey,
Not the,
just see where it takes you. But I guess the mold may not be the kind of customer funnel situation that you're looking for at that point. I just
the idea that I can go repair an old boat, like that's sort of on brand, but it's really the hey, I'm going to go out sailing in significant weather because I like to do risky things like mountain climbing or shoot
mm,
guns or sword fighting. It's all
mm.
about being on brand, man.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's
Arvid,
consistency, right? Let's finish it here because you need to be
yeah,
consistent in what you do. Like that's why people follow you over time. Like following on Twitter and stuff, and I'm gonna be done in a second here. Following is not just about people following you and then you don't care. Following is about retaining a relationship with a person.
Mm,
And for that, you need to be consistent. You need to have a unified, like clear and consistent voice. And that really means that you need to do things all the time in a similar way and not just do random experiments all the time. So pick
mm.
what you like, figure out, experiment now, and then over time grow into somebody who does this all the time.
Beautifully put, Arvid. Thank you for being on Redbeard Radio.
Thank you so much.